Hello there, I'm Keel, Ronin Beatmaker, and welcome to Lounge Ronin, all things, everything. If you're new to the channel, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And on this episode, we're going to discuss female lineage from China found in the Americas. Now, with all things, everything, this will be a bit of a deep dive, but I implore everyone out there to do their own research, as you may be surprised at what you discover about the world and yourself. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right. Now, this article was updated May 10th, 2023 by Sahir. Breakthrough Breakthrough in the peopling of the Americas finds a female lineage from China. A groundbreaking new study has harnessed the power of mitochondrial DNA to trace a marvelous female lineage from northern coastal China all the way to the Americas. This has revealed compelling evidence of not one but two migrations during the last ice age and the subsequent melting period. This discovery challenges the previous beliefs that the ancestry of Native Americans and sheds new light on the complicated history of human migration and settlement in the Americas. Coinciding with the timeline of the second migration is another branch of the same lineage, migrating to Japan. This is a potential explanation for the Paleolithic archaeological similarities between the Americas, China, and Japan, explains the study published in the latest edition of Cell Reports. A complicated ancestry, tracing lineage. It has popularly been believed that ancient Siberians who crossed over a land bridge in the Bering Strait linking modern Russia and Alaska were the sole ancestors of Native Americans. This accepted wisdom is now being challenged in many ways, thanks to newer and newer scientific studies like this. This new study heavily points towards multiple waves of human migration from various parts of Eurasia to the Americas. Keep in mind, personally, this is my own opinion, that we are talking about one time period in human civilization. As we do know through many cataclysms that are told throughout ancient biblical texts as well as historical and scholar texts, that there have been many different forms of civilizations that have occupied North America, Eurasia, Europe. So we have to keep into mind that, as we've talked about in previous episodes, about the fact that there were already dark-skinned Aborigines living in North America. We have to keep into mind that we are dealing with a plethora of different migration periods that take place either before the last ice age, after the last ice age, or prior to the previous last ice age. And I know it sounds a little convoluted what I'm saying, but if you've been keeping track of what we've been covering lately and you understand about the various cataclysms that Graham Hancock has talked about, the work of Randall Carlson, then you'll understand where I'm coming from. But I think you get the point that we are dealing with various different waves of human migration into these parts of the world, some that were more advanced than others. And this is just something that we should all keep in mind when we do our own individual work and studies and research into these topics of civilization and humanity. Let's continue. The ancestry of Native Americans is more complicated than previously indicated. First author Yu Chun Li, a molecular anthropologist at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Quote, in addition to previously described ancestral sources in Siberia, Australo-Melanesia, and Southeast Asia, we show that northern coastal China also contributed to the gene pool of Native Americans. End quote. Now, personally, that might explain why you have a lot of reluctance from the casino tribes to do any forms of DNA testing. It might turn out that they were never originally from here, but their lineage traced all the way to China, Japan. But, that's another topic for another time. But let's continue. A team of researchers from the Chinese Academy of Science embarked on a quest to trace a lineage that could potentially connect East Asia Paleolithic populations to the functioning populations in Chile, Peru, Bolivia, Brazil, Ecuador, Mexico, and California. This lineage currently presents a mitochondrial DNA provides a unique window into tracing kinship through the maternal line, according to the press release. The lineage known as D4H has used in the research, allowing the team to trace maternal ancestry over the course of 10 years. The research team from the Cumming Institute of Zoology embarked on an extensive analysis of over 100,000 contemporary and 15,000 ancient DNA samples collected across Eurasia. This led them to identifications of 216 contemporary and 39 ancient individuals belonging to this rare lineage. After a thorough comparison of accumulated genetic mutations, geographical locations, and carbon dating, the researchers successfully traced the lineage bracing trajectory. Now, here we have an image showing said tracing of trajectory. So here you have China, you have Korea, Japan, and you have the migration over to Alaska. The maternal ancestry from Chinese and Japanese lineages was traced in studies showing Paleolithic archaeological similarities among northern China, the Americas, and Japan. And you see, personally, we have to also keep in mind that we were dealing with various types of that at one point, I should correct myself, at one point there were a global civilization. Maybe there was more than once during the previous ice ages and various cataclysms. And that could also contribute to the fact of finding these lineages of Chinese and Japanese in the Americas. This is just another thing to take into consideration. But let's continue. 2 migration events changing the timeline. Evidence of 2 migration events from northern coastal China to the Americas emerged. The first of these occurred roughly between 19,500 and 26,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum. Potentially, the severe ice sheet coverage in northern China at its peak rendered the region inhospitable for human habitation during this period. The second migration unfolded during the subsequent deglaciation or melting period, spanning from 19,000 to 11,500 years ago, a period of relative warming. A little weird, that kind of coincides with the timeline of Göbekli Tepe, but I digress. The favorable climate conditions during this phase likely contributed to the rapid population increase, causing perhaps even forcing an expansion of human communities into other geographical regions. It is likely that both groups arrived in the Americas via Pacific coast rather than venturing through the inland ice sphere corridor, which would not have been accessible during this time, reports the Daily Mail. During this deglaciation period, another group branched from northern coastal China and made their way to Japan, forging an intriguing connection. Quote, we were surprised to find that this ancestral source would also contribute to the Japanese gene pool, especially the indigenous anise, says Lee. End quote. Now, We also have to remember that there was a there is a pyramid in Indonesia. I apologize. There's heavy rain going on right now in my area. We have to keep in mind that there is a pyramid in Indonesia that predates the last ice age. So there's a pyramid in Indonesia that was built before the last ice age. So when I say that we are dealing with a international civilization, maybe more than one, these are things we also have to keep into consideration when it comes to the migration of these various gene pools. We also have to take into consideration the fact about what the Egyptians have said about their travels to North America as well as to Ireland. Check out my video on the the old gypsy rulers of Ireland, which I know they do not use that word anymore as it is a derogatory word, but it was first thing that could pop into my mind, so I apologize. But I do have several videos covering these topics, and I may put a playlist together for that, so keep an eye out for that. But let's continue. Similarity in East and West technologically explained. This serves as a solid explanation for the archaeological similarities observed among the Paleolithic peoples of China, Japan, and the Americas. This is observed particularly in their shared crafting techniques for stemmed projectile points used in crafting arrowheads and spears. Quote, this suggests that Paleocene connection among the Americas, China, and Japan was not confined to culture but also to genetics. Quote, says senior author Jingpeng Kong on evolutionary geneticists at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. And here we have a image of prehistoric Native American projectile points. Although the focus on the study primarily centered on the mitochondrial DNA, contemporary evidence from Y chromosome DNA further indicates the presence of male ancestors of Native Americans in northern China during the same period as their female counterparts. Quote, the origins of several founder groups are still elusive or controversial. Next, we plan to collect and investigate more Eurasian lineages to obtain more complete picture of the origin of Native Americans, concludes Kong, end quote. Now, like I said, we have to remember that there are multiple different narratives that are being designed for us to believe in. And this whole idea with the Native Americans, which I think is funny, how the Chinese researchers are essentially saying the quiet part out loud that many North American tribes, these casino tribes, refuse to admit that their lineage genetically probably traces all the way back to Asia. But their refusal to admit that is a bit of an issue, especially when it comes to the Aborigine Americans, the dark-skinned Americans who were already here. Now, we already addressed the Four Corners region with Al-Abu Qusar, which you can check out that video. Now, the next video that will be coming out will further confirm the idea and the evidence that most countries throughout the world were probably occupied and colonized by dark-skinned, and what I mean by dark-skinned, black-skinned individuals from North America all the way to Asia. But that's just a little tease. Now let's continue on in our deep dive into this genetic mystery. Now, here we have the scientific journal about the mitogenome evidence shows two radiation events and dispersals of material lineal ancestry from northern coastal China to the Americas and Japan. Now, like I said before, those casino tribes, If they were to do my ancestry or any of those DNA tests, they would more than likely find out that they're from China or Japan, maybe even India. But I digress. The highlights. Native American lineage D4H3A can trace its ancestry to northern coastal China. Radiations of DH4 contribute to gene pools of Native Americans and Japanese. Coastal radiations of D4H support the coastal route of early Native Americans. Now, like I said, there are already dark-skinned people, Aborigine people already here prior to the arrival of the Native Americans. But just something to keep in mind when you do your further studies and you keep an eye out for Tuesday's video. Summary. Although it is widely recognized that the ancestry of Native Americans primarily came from Siberia, the link between mitochondrial lineage D4H3A and D4H3B, found so far only in East China and Thailand, raises the possibility of the ancestral sources of early Native Americans were more varied than hypothesized. Here we analyze 216 contemporary D4H mitogenomes and 39 previously reported ancient D4H data. The results reveal two radiation events of D4H in northern coastal China, one during the last glacial maximum and the other within the last deglaciation, which facilitated the dispersal of D4H sub-branches to different areas, including the Americas and the Japanese archipelago. The coastal distributions of NA and Japanese lineages, in combination with the Paleolithic archaeological similarities among northern China, the Americas, and Japan, led to support the coastal dispersal scenario of early Native Americans. Here we have the geographical abstract, which we covered in Article 1. So here we have China, Japan, Korea, all that fun jazz. And here's the migration heading all the way over to Alaska. All right, introduction. As the last continent settled by modern humans, the peopling of the Americas and subsequent dispersals within continent have been the focus of intense interest by geneticists. Previous studies have shown that ancestors of indigenous Americans, also called Native Americans, originated in Asia. I'll repeat that. Previous studies have shown the ancestors of indigenous Americans, also called Native Americans, originated in Asia, most likely in the eastern part of Asia, and settled in the Americas by means of multiple dispersals through Siberia, Beringia, via the coastal route and possibly the inland ice-free corridor, followed by later divergence into subgroups. Now, when we covered the Four Corners video about Al-Abukasar from Mali, the emperor, who colonized Americas in the Four Corners region, we studied that even there, the Aborigine Americans, who were dark-skinned, were already intermingling and communicating with the Native Americans, or the indigenous Americans. There was already coagulation going on during this time. Just something to keep in mind when you do your own studies. Let's continue. The origin of early Native Americans to date has been attributed to the complex process involving multiple dispersals from different source places, as indicated by substantial investigations. Besides the widely recognized Siberian ancestries from other places, although limited, have also been identified, including North Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia, and even Australasia. In agreement with these observations, evidence from unparental markers further indicates that the majority of Native Americans show closer genetic affinity to Siberians, as manifested by Native American founder types. And thus they trace their ancestral sources in Siberia. In contrast, a sister lineage of Native American matrilineal founder D4H3A, D4H3B has been so far observed only in China and Thailand. suggesting that the ancestral material sources for early Native Americans was not restricted to Siberia, but were for a much wider Asian geographic range. To address this issue, an investigation integrating all available D4H data from a large-scale dataset covering the whole of Eurasia is needed. Given that D4H3 and its ancestry type D4H are relatively rare in contemporary populations, we surveyed a total of 101,319 Eurasian individuals and identified the mtDNAs belonging to D4H3 and its ancestral node D4H. These included 6,979 samples for which partial sequence data, mainly hypervariable segment data, were available, and 40,340 samples with a complete or almost complete mitogenome sequence. This survey identified 110 mtDNAs that could be assigned unambiguously to the haplogroup for D4H based on mitogenome information, as well as 112 mtDNAs likely belonging to D4H based on their HVS or genotyping data, whose complete sequencing revealed 106 additional D4H mitogenomes. Furthermore, to reconstruct the evolutionary history of D4H, we also searched this haplogroup in 15,460 ancient samples compiled by Indo-European, thus covering virtually all global reporting ancient mtDNA data, as well as additional 232 recently reported ancient mtDNA data from East Asia. This survey yielded 39 ancient D4H samples, which reflected the rarity of DH4 in ancient times. Therefore, we integrated these ancient and contemporary data of this rare haplogroup to fully investigate its origin and expansion history. Results: differentiation of D4H3 and D4H in Central and North China. We're just going to read the first one and we'll wrap it up there. To shed light on the origin of Native American founder D4H3A, we explored its ancestor D4H3. Our findings allowed an update of the D4H3 phylogeny and its branches. Specifically, to avoid any confusion, we kept the names of D4H3A and D4H3B and tentatively named their upstream nodes pre-D4H3A and pre-D4H3B, respectively. Differently from the Native American founder D4H3A, the other branches of D4H3 are mainly distributed in China. In detail, D4H3B1, the Hebei province in North China, is found in the north and central China, while D4H3B2, root type in Hubei province, is mainly distributed in central China. Coincidentally, among the reported ancient mtDNA data from different locations in Eurasia, we found their ancient samples belonging to D4H3 data as early as 14 to 15 kilo years ago, Kaya, in the Amur River Valley located in northern North China. One of these mtDNA samples, NE5, derives from the pre-D4H3A and is phylogenetically the closest to the Native American founder D4H3A mitogenome. The remaining two samples, NE34 and NE18, are both members of pre-D4H3B. Overall, these findings indicate that the ancestral homeland of D4H3 is most likely Central and North China, and both branches of D4H3 were there during the Paleolithic period. These branches locate in central North China and reflect the closest Asian matrilineal link to D4H3A, one of the founder Pan-American mtDNA haplogroups. Woo! And there you have it. A light introduction into the female lineage from China found in the Americas. Now, like I implore you, I will be sure to have the links in the description that will allow you to do a further deep dive into the scientific paper if you feel so inclined. But we're going to continue on, but with more topics covering this. But the whole point that I wanted to say in closing is for everyone to really take a second and realize that we really don't know the true scope of the migration of various cultures and races. Also, we don't know who previously migrated and colonized these areas after these various different cataclysms that we have had throughout this entire existence of this planet. We know that there are various civilizations, extremely advanced to some that were just sticks and stones. But we have to keep in mind that there is so much propaganda and misinformation and disinformation within our history books and within the mainstream academia that tries to control and determine our history of civilization. When we take that into consideration, when we do our own personal studies and deep dives, we are then able to more or less be able to distinguish between what is true, what is fact, what is propaganda, what is misinformation, and what is disinformation. Yes, history is written by the victors, but it's also written by the deep state. And let's be honest, they're two sides of the same coin. And as individuals, we all have to understand this moving forward, whether it comes to mainstream academia and history of civilizations, or politics, or health and fitness. All of these things are being manipulated. And we as individuals have to come together with like-minded individuals to exploit and call out the said manipulation of us, as well as our history. We are being denied the ability to fully actualize the truth of our own humanity. And for what? To diminish our capabilities of becoming fully functionalized people within our personhoods? To deny us the ability to become greater than what society deems us? Greater than what mainstream religious Bibles and Qurans and Torahs dictate for us? Clearly, we are much more than meets the eye. But the powers to be deny us that capability, deny us the ability to know that. Here we are now learning the origins of our lineage and of our genetics. And every day it gets more and more fishier because we keep on learning the truth as the veil continues to be unlifted. And this goes for anything in our world. And I implore all of you out there to please embrace your individuality. Embrace the curiosity. Do your own research. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And don't be afraid to go it out on your own. You will find like-minded individuals. You will find a community. But you have to want to do it. And you have to want to desire it. Just as much as you want to desire to be the best version of yourself, you also have to desire that for your knowledge of the world, humanity, and health. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Lounge Ronin. All things, everything. If you've made it this far, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And until next time, stay positive, stay focused, stay true, and much, much love.